Welcome back to the second hour of LoveBabz LoveTalk. I'm delighted this morning. Welcome back, Professor Thomas Allen Harris.
How are you, Babz? It's good to be here.
It is lovely to see you. And welcome, Jon S Golf.
Jon is actually not on yet, but Jon's father, Reverend Golf, is here.
Oh, hello, Reverend Golf. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. Oh, I see. Jon is logging in now. Hello. Welcome. Can you see us? We see you.
And Reverend Goff, you're muted.
There we go. Hello.
How are you? So you have to get your dad unmuted.
Yeah.
So you just have to hit the little microphone button. Not the camera, the microphone button. I know, Lord, we had to teach our parents how to use the technology.
No, it's still off.
Like, don't hit the camera button. Hit the microphone. I think I might be able. Nora, can you unmute? Let's see if I can.
Can I do it?
Hey, Jon, good to see you.
Hey, great to see you.
Well, what we'll do is, Nora, if you have a chance, or Nora or Harry, yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Now you'll click back on.
There we go.
Okay, so after Sherman, so I've been reading all I can about the film, and I think I have a better understanding of what it is. So it seems like it is a homage to the Geechee culture through history, through a father and a son, that sort of tells us that our history as Black people in this country is unfinished. I don't know. Am I close to what the way you wanted people to think about that?
That works.
Okay. Yeah. So you tell me about this film, Jon. Okay. Now they're both gone.
Jeez.
I know it's a technological challenge. All right. So Professor Thomas, you tell me, what is your relationship to this film?
Sorry.
Well,
that's all right.
I kept defaulting to my earplugs.
I get it.
All right.
So I'll let Jon start, and I can talk a little bit about. Well, I'm Jon Goff and his father, Reverend Goff, are coming to New Haven to show the film next week, Monday evening, and that's Monday the 26th, as part of a co-sponsored event between the Yale School of Divinity, of which Reverend Goff is an alum, and also my class, Family Narratives, Cultural Shifts. And so we've been working on bringing this illustrious team with this amazing story for about 6 months. So I'm really glad that they're going to be coming, and we wanted to let the local community know about it. And so I'll let Jon tell you what After Sherman is about.
Yeah, Babz, I love your synopsis. It's an unfinished story of American history told through the lens of my family and the folks in the Low Country. And so what originally I set out to be just my own creative expression and homage to this place that my father has told me throughout my life is my home place, despite actually being born in Connecticut. and, and having to navigate sort of that throughout my life. but really it's the journey of just honoring community, honoring faith, honoring our ancestry as descendants of West African people.
Okay, so who had the idea first? Was it Reverend Goff, or was it you, to sort of capture this story, this part of history?
It definitely wasn't my dad. I think
was he your reluctant partner?
No, he was a willing partner. we had many interviews over the years. It was an 8-year process, and I'm pretty sure I interviewed him no less than 16 times. But every conversation was an interview, was a preparation for this film.
Okay, all right. So tell me, how did you know where to start? And Reverend Goff, how eager were you to participate in this process?
Well, first of all, I was more than happy to participate because I thought it was a worthwhile project, which I'm very proud of Jon S and seeing this through as he journeyed throughout the history of his family, starting with my parents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents, over 150 years of having not only property in South Carolina, but most certainly the history. This film, after Sherman, allows individuals to look through the window pane of history of Black Americans in the Low Country in South Carolina. But it's a microcosm of what takes place throughout the Americas, and that is one lived history to be shared and to gain insight and knowledge as we prepare a present generation for the future, and to understand one's history in order to make progress for the future.
Oh, I love it. So Jon, you grew up hearing these stories. Was there any time in your life where you're like, you know what, I don't really want to hear another story? and then what was the moment when you said, you know what, this is my story. Let me capture this.
I think it was almost the inverse. I grew up listening to the voice of my grandmother and other people in the community. And when my grandmother passed, I recognized that sort of this tonal quality was leaving the earth. And I really wanted to. I took photos of my grandmother, but I really wanted to start recording voices of people, and so I started working with my cousin Bunny, our cousin Bunny Rodriguez, who's a Gullah Uman, was a folklorist and culturalist in her own right, and I wanted to record this because I knew it wouldn't be around forever.
Mm-hmm. And Gullah, the Gullah culture and the experience and the language and the tone and the music, that is very specific. Like, you know it when you hear it, at least for a lot of Black folks who know folks in the South. You know it when you hear it. When I was a kid, we used to laugh at people, like, oh, you geechee. But as I've grown up, I realized that it is as close to the African diaspora as we are ever going to get in this country in terms of a culture that is preserved from beginning to now. How does that make you feel? Or do you think of it that way? Or how do you imagine the culture staying relevant and protected?
Well, I think everything we've been told is almost a lie because, the written histories that were disseminated weren't necessarily the truth. And people forget that there is an unbroken chain of memories, that there are, traditions that, may not look like what the Western world honors as being encyclopedic, but, certainly deep knowledge. And, it comes through the lens and prism of faith. Like I had a friend, a theologian, who used to joke that, everything we consider American Christianity has been touched by Africanisms, has been touched by the presence of Black people in America and transformed it. It is no longer the same, you know, like that spirit, that shout, that praise. That's something that's uniquely through the African spirituality that, you know, we retained and shared with others we came in contact with.
So, Professor Allen, how do you teach this? How do you share this part of our culture and history in the classroom? How do you tell students about there's this community of people? It's a very small community, I imagine. How do you remind people that this is important?
Well, you know, the class that I teach, that the film is a part of this semester, is called Family Narratives, Cultural Shifts. So it's looking at filmmakers who mine their family archives and stories to shed light on larger social movements. And so part of the class is looking at films and the ways in which filmmakers tell the story, mine their archives. And I have to say, you know, the archives that Jon and his family and Reverend Goff has generated and preserved have just been amazing. And the way in which Jon has interwoven these personal family archives with larger public stories, both archives he's found, is just, you know, really poetic. It's a journey that not only takes you into a kind of personal history, a regional history, but also a national and a universal kind of story of the poetics of this particular place and this particular journey. And that's what's really exciting. And I try to get my students to actually engage in those similar kinds of journeys through a series of blogs that happen over the course of the year. And they also go into all these different archives and reblend their own family archives, their family photographs with public archives. And so it's a very generative kind of experience. And they can see in this experience that how deeply they're connected with other people who both look like them and share personal story, and who don't look like them, and, you know, that they didn't necessarily think they shared anything with, you know. And I have to share a personal story in terms of this particular film, After Sherman. And that is, yeah, and this is something that, you know, Jon and I have known one another, you know, for almost a decade, I think. And, you know, we were even in Brazil together at the Afro-Brazilian Film Festival, which I think you should definitely, you know, share this film with if you haven't already submitted it. But, you know, I didn't know about the, you know, intensity of the Gullah Geechee history. And, you know, my grandmother comes from Santee. And, you know, she left when she was 10 years old. And when she left Mother Emmanuel AME Bethel Church, Emmanuel AME Church, and moved to New York and joined First Bethel AME Church, which goes back to the 1800s. And so I had this relationship with, but the conditions, I didn't have a chance to really interview her about her past, and the little bit I did, she refused to talk. She never went back to, after leaving, you know, we never went back to South Carolina, to Charleston. And with the exception of one time after my grandfather died, just before she died, and none of the family went back. And so there's trauma around that. And so to see this film, and, you know, I see this film, but I'm also like loving the fact that the film celebrates food, you know, and all these different cultural kinds of things, because I'm recognizing certain things. And there's a cookbook, actually, Gullah Geechee cookbook, and I was reading that cookbook in addition to, you know, as I'm preparing to receive Jon and Reverend Goff and at Yale for the screening and the discussion, and realizing how much my grandmother's cooking was Gullah. And so I'm really anxious to speak with you guys about, you know, these different subtle things, you know, in the film, which is so enriching for me.
I read a piece that said that I guess in the opening of the film, Reverend Goff's narration is at the beginning of it, saying there is a birthplace and there is a home place. And Reverend Goff, would you expand on that a little bit? I think I know what you mean by that, but I want to hear you clean it up for me.
Well, birthplace is most certainly is a linkage between where one was born and where the oral tradition intersects with history, not only through faith, food, and future, in terms of teaching the culture of our people, which shows how one has survived through some traumatic experiences. And there are some things that one should never forget because it allows us to become our better selves. And how do we survive? For people who have survived coming from the motherland to the Americas is a miracle in itself. But when one understands a people of faith, the faith allows us to rise above our circumstances. And I believe that after Sherman can bring about a greater understanding about where we were, where we are, and where we are headed. And that must be an ongoing educational opportunity for all, the young and old alike. So we can bring about what King and others and many of us call the beloved community that allows us to not only see humans as humans beyond the color line in which we so much identify individuals and try to pigeonhole them and how they should behave, what is the projected attitude of one's because one look at one's skin rather than the content of one's character and achievement to bring about transformative positive change. And that, I believe, after Sherman would allow students and those who view it to get an insight in terms of what makes us the kind of culture and the kind of people that we can celebrate. And just because we celebrate our history and culture does not mean that we will negate others, but most certainly we should be able to trace our history, celebrate our history, and also plan for the future.
I like that. Yeah. So I, like a lot of people, John, I saw High on the Hog, and it had a whole segment on the Gullah culture. They, you know, the film took us to the Gullah lands, and we saw people, and we saw the cooking, and we saw the celebration of that. My favorite film of all time is Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust, which I still revere as the most beautiful film ever made. Do you feel like there is a growing awareness or a desire to understand this culture and to protect this culture?
I think there's a growing awareness, but it's connected to the larger search for identity. You know, Thomas, Professor Harris touched on it. You know, my dad talked about it in terms of like these linkages of community. And so it's really the fact that over, 60% of Africans arriving to America came through the port of Charleston. So that means the majority of people who are descendants of enslaved Africans in America are, in one way or another, connected to Gullah Geechee culture. My mother, born in Ohio, family from Kentucky, other side of her family traced through Alabama back to where? To Charleston, and so there is a retention, there is a commonality, there are shared values, there is culture. And actually when I was teaching, which was one of my impetuses for making this film, was I had a young Black woman in my class, and a young white man asked her, is there even such thing as Black culture? And she said, no, not other than food, and I like had to go jump over tables to intervene, and it's like that's the disconnect, like the project of colonialism was successful. We know that Black people in America are also subject to the ramifications of that project, but it's not all lost. It's all not for naught. And I just had to go mine a few archives and and share them. And I think beyond the film, beyond the frame of the film, the collection of materials that I've gathered, the oral histories that were conducted, many of them never appearing in the film, create a larger repository of knowledge that I hope others will be able to access at some point. And, you know, it's unbroken. It's an unbroken chain. Julie Dash, Daughters of the Dust, you know, after Sherman, it's all a continuum.
So tell me about the title. Why the title?
Because I'm a cynic and and I loved Ross McAvee's Sherman's March, you know, which was heralded as the first commercially successful documentary, you know, theatrically released documentary. And it was just beautiful. And here he is tracing his lineage and his story, like, you know, sort of aimlessly through the Low Country. And there's one scene with Black people, and I was just perplexed. I love the film. I was just like, man, how do you manage not to see no Black people? I'm like, all I see are Black people. You know, the county was over 85% Black. So it's like, you know, like that, especially in the 80s. And so like that part of it, you know, like it's like we got to color in the rest of the frame and in the rest of the picture. You know, it's not just that which has been able to be, you know, composited and shared and packaged as a film.
So go ahead, Reverend.
Let me say this just for a moment. I think also the documentary calls into question for one to have critical thinking. It raises questions that needs to be answered individually and collectively and as a community. It also forces those who happen to be in the academy, where you have the participation in the arena of ideas, and to make sure that one can reaffirm that which we may think, but we need to bring some academic scholarship to make sure that we provide an opportunity for others who follow us or who are participating with us in creating a table where everyone has a seat to share experiences that allows us to have a more comprehensive presentation of what our history really is, and that is not subtracted from by those who have the ability to write or publish information for the wider community. I don't think it raises questions that need to be answered. And the way I believe that the classes that is being taught at Yale with the professor and this film allow students to engage in that kind of educational pursuit, to ask questions, even if they don't come up with an answer right away, but they can strive to receive answers from others and from themselves.
Right. And
Professor go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that's actually been the biggest criticism of the film, is that I didn't answer American racism or like, why is there American domestic terrorism or white supremacy? People are like, why you didn't solve it by the end of the film? I'm like, did y'all solve it? Because if I could do it in 90 minutes, it should have been done. But no, it's unresolved. It is unsettling. That's the experience.
Well, it's still it's unresolved, and look where we are. We're having these ridiculous conversations about critical race theory,
right?
And it has just captured people's it has captured people's imaginations in a ridiculous sort of way, and so yes, it's still unresolved, and it only comes up because we have not had these kinds of conversations about, you know, what has happened to enslaved people in this country, and to tell the truth about that. So, Professor Thomas, did you have people in your class who had no idea of the Gullah culture?
Well, you know, we have not had that class yet. That's coming up. So
okay.
The film is actually showing in the at Yale the Humanities Quad Theater on Monday, and so it's going to be showing on Monday at 7 o'clock, and all are welcome. And I'm not sure, Babz, how do we let people know through the show?
I think I've posted it up in our social media site, so it's up.
Okay.
we have it on our social media pages.
Okay. So I'll try to put it also in the link. But the so the students are going to. It's going to be interesting to see how many students were aware of Gullah Geechee culture, and not only aware of that, but also aware, as Jon mentioned, of the way in which it is grounding for Black culture, across the United States, and the origins. In the 90s, I went to Brazil because I wanted to experience another way of seeing Africans in the Americas, and I was interested in, candomblé and African retentive kinds of things, and it drove me to come back and see and find material that my grandfather shot in Bethel AME Church. And so, like, when I watch this film, it makes me think about, wow, what is, my responsibility for going back to Charleston, which I've never been to, and so it's very, I'm really looking forward to the conversation that comes out of this experience, in terms of having the film there and the public screening, the public Q&A with Reverend Goff, and there's going to be another Yale Divinity alum there as well, and both the public but also the class and the class that happens next day. A lot of documentary filmmakers really shy away from spirituality and religion, except to kind of critique it, and so this particular film, is embracing spirituality, but also having and looking at the history. And I think it's going to raise a way for us to maybe more of a vocabulary to talk about navigating representation with regards to spirit. I mean, so as Reverend Goff said, there's so much pain and unanchoredness in the country in terms of, and the world in terms of, who we are, and a relationship to a kind of a grounding within spirituality, however people choose to make that journey. And I think this film, through both through the poetics, through the relationship between a father and a son, and your mother's also, I believe, in the film, allows us to begin to look at it in a way that is not dogmatic, but in a way that is both questioning and also generative. And so I think that it kind of gives us, it quenches our thirst, basically.
I don't think you could talk about that without, it makes me think about Ebo's Landing and the mystery and the history around that, and what's truth and what's spiritual and what's legend. So I just find all that kind of stuff fascinating and uniquely Black. Like, that's such a Black kind of vibe. So I love it. So Jon and Reverend Goff, talk to me about when y'all were doing this, what was it like to be in conversation with each other about your culture and your history, and how does Connecticut play in that? I know you were born here, but like, how do you add that into the story? Which there's a lot of Black people in Connecticut, contrary to popular belief, and there's a lot of Black people here who have Geechee cultural roots. So I will say that. So talk to me about
most of the
that.
Black folks in New Haven or in Connecticut had a North Carolina relationship. Is it also South Carolina?
Oh yes. I used to live downstairs. Used to live upstairs for some folks that were Geechee.
Matter of fact, right adjacent to the Yale community, there's a street called Golf Street.
Yes.
And what's the history of that?
And where Bethel AME Church is nearby.
Yes, right across.
Yes, that's right.
You know it well.
And the AME Church as an institution for me, it starts as the Free African Society, and a greater project and a greater experiment that people don't understand. And again, that continuity and that continuum, that's why we can shout out the Bethels and the Mother Bethels and you know, the Emmanuels and little Emmanuels, you know, like there's a reason why they exist. Like it was safe passage, you know, it was for the protection of women and children, you know, widows and children was the Free African Society, because they knew that this country would not take care of them, you know, like that they did not care about their loved ones. And so who would do it other than your community in that space in which you also invest and participate in? And so that is why you have that, you know, connection from, you know, throughout the Carolinas. My grandparents actually met in Philadelphia in the 1930s, you know, and moved back to Georgetown. So it's like, this is endless, you know, and folks were recruited to come to Connecticut, Black teachers from HBCUs in the South, primarily in the Carolinas, to teach an influx of Black children from the South and from the West Indies, you know, and that is how you get that, you know, whole generation of folks starting in, you know, with the Great Migration.
Well, one of the things I'd like to point out is you questioned how was it for father and son to work on a project like this with a sense of pride, knowing that the oral and written tradition is being passed on. It lives because we are repeating it. I shall never forget sitting in the office of the governor of the state of Connecticut. His name was Governor O'Neill at the time, and Maynard Jackson came to Hartford, Connecticut, and he was sharing the history about how he came from Atlanta to Windsor, Connecticut, to crop tobacco, and that the tobacco that was cropped out of Windsor, Connecticut, was noted for some of the finer tobaccos for cigars. And my point in raising that is that because of our culture has expanded throughout the world, we have an opportunity to teach folk who are in high places about their own surroundings and how we have impacted it. And I thought at that moment when Maynard Jackson shared that story in the governor's office, I was saying, a good teaching moment, because we all
you know, that's Reverend King's story too. He came up when he was about 16, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Every summer he would come and work in Windsor in the tobacco fields. Crazy, so, right?
You, along with Professor Harris and John and others whom we impact on our journey through this life, have an obligation to share our story and to make sure our voices are heard in a very constructive way that allow folk to learn from our experiences as we will learn from theirs.
I like that very much. So before I let y'all go, how do we preserve the culture? I mean, we talk about preserving the culture, and we have an obligation to tell these stories. How do we do that? How do we do that in a world that is so anti right now? Although the pushback from people of color is we're going to celebrate and we're going to share this stuff, but the pushback is we don't want to hear it. We don't want to see it.
Even if they don't want to hear it, I think even when I preach, even if they don't want to hear it, you still got to preach anyhow until it is not necessary. And I don't see that in the very near future. But the point is, how do we preserve it is through documentary, through classes that are being presented, not only in our HBCUs, but also that larger community. They need to understand in all levels of government and corporate America, our responsibility is to expose them to information that will help them bring about a better community, whether it be corporate in the community in which we live, and to have documentaries, and to have programs like yours, and to continue to write books and to films. We must make sure we preserve that history in our own museums. You know, we need to make sure that our voices are heard in public education, where they're trying to root out all traces of our history. we must have a voice in making sure that they retain that information that can be shared, not just with Black and brown students, but white and others who may not have the knowledge of our culture.
I like that. So, Jon, before we go, I'm gonna give you the last word. You want people to, when they leave this film on Monday, or wherever it's shown moving forward, what do you want people to take away from this? I know you cannot control, but if you could have your way, what would you want people to take away from this film?
That that love is a powerful thing, and it's endless and infinite, and the love that we find within ourselves has been planted and seeded by many generations before, and what a blessing it is to be a beneficiary of that love.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Thomas Allen Harris. It's a pleasure to see you again.
You too, Babz, and I'm excited. Hopefully, we'll see you there as well.
I'm gonna do my best.
On Monday.
Yes, I'm gonna do my best. I don't want to miss this. Thank you, Reverend Goff. It is my absolute pleasure to speak with you. And Jon, thank you. I can't wait to see this film and maybe get a few words with you at the screening, if possible.
The screening's going to be screen is beautiful. It's beautiful screening, beautiful sound, and so it's going to be. I'm really excited to be able to host this visit with Jon and really give the film like a really beautiful presentation, and the discussion, as you could tell, is going to be completely live and beautiful as well.
Well, thank y'all so much.
It's a piece of art. It's also a film. It's a cinematic experience. So, deeper than the themes presented in it, I want people to, love and experience, just the power of that form.
Okay. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to seeing this, and I appreciate your time this morning.
All right.
Y'all go in peace, and I will see y'all on Monday.
Blessing. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a good afternoon.
You too.
All right. All right, Nora, Harry, play me out. I'm on my way. The link is on the chat, but it is up on our social media. So I hope people register and come and see this wonderful film. I can't wait to see it. Thank y'all for another great day. Happy Wednesday, y'all. I'm going to go marry some people. I'll see y'all.